Welcome to the Practice You podcast. My name is Elena Brower. Let's dive into today's conversation regarding life's myriad transitions and how we refine our responses in our relationships, our wellness, our households, our work, and in our practices. You are invited to learn and love and listen with me. Welcome to Practice You. Welcome back to the podcast. I have with me today a father-son duo, a very special story and one that I think will be inspiring to you and possibly to those you love. Stephen Fisher, father, LPC, master's degree in counseling in 1992, over 25 years of experience with individual, family, and group counseling with families, parents, adolescents, children. He also has training and experience in Montessori secondary education, which I find very interesting and I need to ask you about. You've spent the last 25 years helping people and groups to transform relationships and lives. And you're bringing a depth of understanding of human communication and human behavior. I am super excited to mine this depth of understanding. Matthew is your son. Matthew, you are incredibly passionate about helping others heal and connect. You are a lover of the outdoors. You have a deep passion for the well-being of others and the environment. You have a wide variety of experience working and volunteering in mental health and personal development, including being a wilderness therapy field guide. I've heard such tremendous things about this. A youth leader, and a residential counselor at a drug and alcohol treatment center. You are also a certified yoga and meditation teacher. So the two of these beautiful gentlemen wrote a book, my listener. It's called Light Shines Through the Broken Pieces, A Father and Son's Journey to Healing. And this book is a story of your shared journey to healing through substance abuse, depression, anger, and family conflict. And it offers lessons, this book, to all parents and teens who feel lost in the struggle of dealing with the intense challenges of the teen years. It is a story of redemption, growth, healing the emotional anguish that many families experience during that time, and shares a message of hope, shows a path to maturity for struggling teens and for their parents. I want to first give the website so our listener can head over to the website as they wish. It is fishertransformation.com/book. That's again, FISHER, transformation.com/book. I would just go and have a peek while we're talking. I want to welcome you both to the podcast and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us, Lena.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, you bet. So I first want to start with the story. Where was the substance abuse happening? What exactly occurred? How old were you, Matthew? What year was this? Give me kind of the details, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So, kind of some context. Just since I was really young, I really struggled with a lot of mood and anger issues, and just was kind of physically abusive my brothers and punched my dad in the face when I was 13, and got arrested for fighting in 8th grade. It was just all this really intense emotional and anger issues, and I was diagnosed with a mood disorder, depression, ADHD. And just around 13, I discovered, drugs and alcohol was kind of this way for me to cope with all this anger, because it was just internally really like ashamed of how I was treating people, and it felt out of control. And I didn't want to be like that. And to a certain degree, it was kind of a mental health issue. And I was in therapy and I was taking medications, but I just found, drugs and alcohol were kind of this way for me to chill out. I liked who I was better when I was high. And
What year were you born, if you don't mind?
1996.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
So from there, you were 13, 14. How long did the sort of substance abuse last unchecked?
I think just really seriously until about 18. And I kind of had this really big wake-up call, which is in the book, kind of this intense experience of taking painkillers and LSD at a friend's house and just ending up alone, kind of wandering outside. And was February in Colorado, so there was like snow on the ground, and I left the friend's house I was at, and I was just really high, no shoes, no jacket, just wandering around in the cold. It was kind of this moment that I just realized I needed help, and I called my parents, and they came and found me, and yeah, I was experiencing psychedelic-induced schizophrenia for a little bit, or psychosis, which
Yeah.
thankfully went away, but that was pretty much out for like a month or two, couldn't work. I think part of the psychedelic experience is like really magnifying a lot of, internal conflict and inner demons, if you will. And that was just a really big point of like, oh my gosh, like I just felt so much grief at the way I'd been living and the impact I've had on people, and just this intense loneliness and anxiety for how my life had been until that point. And, I think my parents are really, I'm really thankful, and they kind of helped me maintain my sanity and get back on my feet. And, since then I was just like, I can't keep living like this. And I started taking care of myself. I did a yoga teacher training. I did some traveling, and I went to school for outdoor education. So it was like this huge turning point in my life.
And you're in your 20s. You have the whole life ahead of you.
I know. I'm turning 26 next month. Or I guess this month. Yeah, we're in October, so my birthday's
What day's your birthday?
the 24th.
My aunt's birthday is the same day. Dad, let's chime in here for a second with you. So it looks like you trained your entire life to be ready for this phone call that came in. Can you take us back to that day?
Sure. When Matthew called us, it was like 1 o'clock in the morning, and we woke up, and he was at some place on the other side of town, didn't know where it was. He got in the car, and he was guiding my wife on the phone while I was driving, and he gave us some cross streets. We eventually found it, and we showed up, and he was just shivering in the car, and it looked so pitiful. I just felt so heartbroken. And he looked over, he looked up at us. When he saw us, the relief on his face was just overwhelming. And then, we got him and we hugged him, and we got him in the car with me, and my wife drove his car home. And he kept on saying to me, Dad, all the love is gone. Where did it go?
Oof.
Where did it go? And I said,
Oof.
Matthew, it's right here. It never left. And even when I talk about that, I get emotional because, you kind of cut down to the core, the bottom line of what's going on. And that really is what it all comes down to, is he was just so lost in his fears and his emotions and his anxiety and his stress at that moment that he was just so afraid.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the message that I was sending to him and my wife was sending to him was that the love is right here. It's never left. And we're holding that space, not only through this one experience, but through many of the stories in this book and the experiences that we went through. And Matthew was a teenager. The space we were constantly holding for him was that the love is right here. Yes, we're going to have some boundaries. Yes, we're going to have some limitations, but we're always going to love you, and we're always going to be looking for that connection with you. And we're never going to see you as anything less than a whole, complete, and beautiful and perfect human being, even though I know there's a lot of emotional issues to deal with.
Wow. Whew. With a shaky voice and tears in my eyes, I'm really moved by this, and I want to thank you on behalf of any parent listening to this who may choose, instead of being angry at the evidence of irresponsibility and, recklessness, let's say, on the part of your kid, who might actually hear this and turn to the kid and do something similar to what Liz and Stephen have done, which is to just assure the kid that despite the previous behaviors, even if they happen within the last few hours, there's a new start now.
Always.
And it's full of love. I'm so moved, and I'm so thankful to be here with you. What I would love to know from that point, Stephen, Dad, how did you take all of your training and infuse what you knew and know into this situation to help Matthew get past all of the addiction and the fear and the, sort of warping back into his true nature?
Yeah. So as far as what I do as a therapist, the bottom line is that people are good, that we are all have that divine spark of goodness at our core. And what it is to be human is good and is love. And it's constantly keeping focus on that. And yes, you have to deal with the situations. Be really honest about the issues we're dealing with and have boundaries and limitations where needed, but not to do that from a place of anger or frustration, but from a place of love. In that moment, all we felt was complete love for Matthew. I mean, the rest of that night, we got him home and he was, still tripping pretty hard. And we fixed him a pallet at the foot of our bed. And I woke up a couple hours later because it was by 3:30 in the morning and he was gone. And Liz and I were both like, oh my gosh, where did he go? And we looked around frantically. We found him across the street in a park meditating under a tree. So we figured he was starting to have a little better experience at that point. And then we brought him home. And over the next month, he was just in a really, really dark place. And we were just really worried about him. And it took about a month for him to start to really pull out of that horrific place he was in. And after that, that's when I really noticed him start to really take his self-care practices and get his yoga training and get his sleep and eat right and start to really be mindful of his thoughts and his anger. And another thing I teach as a counselor is really being aware of your self-talk, being really aware of the things you're telling yourself in your head. I call them core fears. What are those basic fundamental self-esteem messages we're telling ourselves, like we're worthless or we're not good enough, or all those things that Matthew was deep into at that point, and really learning to understand that self-talk, but you don't have to believe it. Like, you don't have to believe everything you think just because you think something doesn't necessarily make it true. And really working with him, supporting him on really being mindful of his thoughts, being aware of them, not suppressing them, but not believing them either, and then his own self-care. And after that next month, I really started to see him emerge into a better place. And then he started taking his own choices and his own self-care really seriously. And he really stopped hanging out with people that were disempowering to him, those old friends that he was hanging out with. He just couldn't do that anymore. And that was all came from him. We weren't telling him to do these things. This was the beauty of this whole situation, is Matthew internalized it through that experience. He finally said, no, I'm not going to do that anymore. And he chose a whole different path forward from there. And that made all the difference in the world for him.
I've heard some stories of folks who mixed drugs like that and it took them out for a month, seemingly some sort of permanent damage. How worried were you about that being the case?
We were worried, but I will say this, is that the messages we'd always got with Matthew through all of our ups and downs was, I think we had a really strong foundation in our family, and he really had a strong foundation of love and support, and he knew that assistance was there if he ever wanted it. And I felt pretty confident that the history of all of our family life together and who he was as a person would ultimately see him through. But I've seen that situation so many people, so they would go into that and they would, ultimately always be kind of anxious and depressed and maybe never come out of it. And during that month, I was scared. But I also had this knowing that he would get through because I saw what he wanted and I saw the efforts he was making. And this is what I want to say to anybody, is that if people really want to reach out for help and really make the efforts, I don't think there's any obstacles that can't be overcome if people have that desire and that drive within themselves to change, and also the willingness to really be honest and to take a look at their own character defects and their own trauma and to process through it. I think it's possible for anybody, anywhere, but it comes with that choice that has to come from within them.
Yeah. A friend of mine just wrote a book called Lighter, and there's a whole chapter in it about radical honesty, and I think that's what you're referencing, this sort of willingness to say, I am FUCKED right now.
Yep.
And these are the choices that I made that led me to this state, and I'm ready to turn the light around.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. So Matthew, if you're able to and willing to, I would love to hear a little bit more and, as honestly as you can, about your experience of that month. I think a lot of folks are going through some pretty dark times, and I would love to hear your experience of that time.
Yeah, so just kind of the month that I was recovering from that experience.
Precisely.
Yeah, so I have a family history of bipolar and schizophrenia, and it was like my system is just really sensitive to psychedelics too, and so I was just like, I feel like I'm schizophrenic.
Psychedelics and painkillers, to be fair.
Painkillers,
that is a crazy choice to combine those two. I'm not saying that you did a wrong thing. I'm just saying, wow. Note to self, if you're listening, Do not mix, please. Whoa.
But yeah, it was kind of like, for instance, the day after I went into work and I had to leave because it was just like all the sounds and all the people and just everything was just overwhelming. So I had to leave work and I like told my boss, she was like, "What's going on?" I was like, "Yeah, I had a really bad acid trip. I was probably a little too honest." And I ended up leaving that job, but I don't think she like fired me for that, which was interesting. But like I would try and walk my dog, and I just couldn't make it around the block. I was just like curled up on the couch a lot.
Healing your
And
synapses,
I
basically.
would read. I was, I like talk to my dad and just be like super nervous and super anxious. And I was just like, holy shit, like, is this going to be the rest of my life? Am I just going to be kind of incapacitated? I started to feel a little better a couple weeks after. And I remember buying this book called Healing Depression for Life. I mean, that was really helpful. And, I'd always been really into neuroscience and like Daniel Amen and really just like curious about my own brain. But I just really started reading a lot and being like, just really thinking about how all these drugs had impacted my brain and just like my diet and health. And I started doing yoga. We had like a Gaiam subscription. So I was like, doing Rani yoga on the TV and just really getting into that and meditating. And after a month, I felt, I could work again. Yeah, from there, I really just started taking self-care seriously. And yeah, I stopped hanging out with all the people in my life that were using. I was pretty much sober from that point on. I had a few experiences kind of later in life, just drinking a little bit or a few more experiences with psychedelics. That was really the moment I was like, I'm not keep living like this. It was definitely it was very hard, I feel like, but I'm glad I went through it and I'm glad I had the support to really turn that into kind of a transformative healing process. Do you have any more questions on that?
Yeah, I would also love to know, if you are okay to share, what were the most healing choices that you made during that very dark 4-week or 5-week stretch of time that you feel, and I'm going to ask your dad too, but what were the most healing choices that you made that you feel really moved the needle for you out of the, in my mind, I'm seeing the visuals of you curled up in a ball on the couch, your dad and mom coming and going and just like praying their hardest that this would pass and doing and saying whatever they could to get you through it, giving you all the love and support. But what were the choices that you made that got you through it?
I feel like kind of accepting my parents' love and support. I think before that we were fighting a lot, and about through all my teenage years, I just really felt like I couldn't trust anyone. Yeah, and I really just felt like this huge amount of faith in my parents and that relationship, and I think I just felt like a lot of care and love and support from them. So just really just opening that wall within myself. It's like the if anyone's ever read the How the Grinch Stole Christmas, he has that moment where his heart kind of breaks open, or he's like his tiny heart grows 3 sizes. But I felt that a lot, and just like a lot of these walls I'd had around myself, like kind of crumbled. And then I cut that a girl out of my life. I just stopped hanging out with certain people, and yeah, I really, really just yoga, meditation, nutrition were huge for me. And I just really found this like excitement, this passion of being like, oh, like I can actually rebuild my brain and I
Yes.
don't have to be reliant on substances or medications to kind of
Yes.
make myself feel sane.
Mm.
So I would say all of
Neuroplasticity.
those. Yeah, neuroplasticity, totally. And I started seeing a therapist again. There was a really good family friend. I'd been seeing him since I was a kid, and we scheduled a few sessions. And so yeah, therapy was huge. And then maybe like 6 months after, but I enrolled in a yoga teacher training. It was just this really supportive environment. I was like the only guy with like all these older women, so it was kind of like I felt like this little brother of the group. But yeah, just
That's sweet.
and then just kind of started learning a lot about yogic philosophy and meditation and Ayurveda, nutrition, and I just really felt like a part of a community for the first time in a long time, and that had a huge impact on me.
Being accepted by a room full of older women is never a bad thing. Wow. It's very sweet. I'm sure that this is exactly what needed to happen in order for you to be who you are right now in this present moment. Thank you for sharing all of that. Dad, how did Mom, Liz, deal with all of this? Was she with you? I assume that you're still married and she's probably of the same ilk as you are, really conscious and
She
conscientious.
is.
Yeah.
She's actually a therapist with me here at our practice. She's actually right
Genius.
next door in her office talking to somebody right now.
Oh, send her my love. I wish I could meet her too.
I will. I will.
And a Happy New Year.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so I think the last couple of questions are upon us, with a lot of gratitude in my heart for both of you. I think for our listener, I would just love to point out that this is a really good episode to share with families who are having a really hard time, especially families with teens, especially teens who are dealing with some sort of excessive substance use or abuse and struggling to communicate within the family. I would love to know from you, Stephen, what do you focus on in families who come to you with similar situations, not necessarily the sort of, frostbitten teenager tripping out in the cold, but they come to you with situations where everyone is fighting and nobody can get along and the communication is just stilted. What do you do about that?
Right. So first off, if the parents are able to own their emotional issues that contribute to the family dynamics and the family breakdowns, then that's really, really helpful. If the parents can own their part, then it's really possible to get the teenagers and the young adults to own their part. If the parents can't do it, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to get the kids to own their part if the parents won't own theirs. And how to be really lovingly engaged and have healthy parenting practice where you have healthy boundaries. On one hand, having healthy boundaries is important, but then doing those boundaries with love and acceptance rather than criticism and condemnation is also just as important and critical. And if parents can do that, can have both of those things, then it's actually really possible to open a very loving dialogue with parents and kids that actually makes a difference. Without that, families are dead in the water. So we focus on those kind of dynamics. The adults owning their stuff, the kids owning their part, and looking at the family dynamics, looking at things like triangulation and other issues in family communication. And once we have that kind of safe dialogue, that's emotionally safe, where people aren't criticizing each other, because the problem is not the parents and the problem is not the kids. The problem is the blame game or how we communicate in a blaming and critical manner. If we can get through that, then anything else that can be resolved. If we can get the process healthy, then the product is going to be just fine. And so those are the kind of things I focus on in therapy.
Thank you for that. I would like to put the highlighter pen for myself and for our listener on the love and acceptance. I have a 16-year-old, and there have been many times where I really did not, in my cognitive brain, did not want to accept what was being said to me or done in my house. And instead of, coming down hard and just being the sort of tyrant, I offered love and acceptance and lowered my voice instead of raising it. And, this also comes with age. So if you're listening to this, our listener, and you're in your 30s or your 40s, promise, you will turn 50 if God is willing to let you do that. And you will soften. You will mellow out. Things do change in our chemistry as we get older. But I found, to your point, that love and acceptance have created within my household a really sweet resonance between us.
Mm-hmm.
You can't really shake it. Even when I don't agree with his choices, we're still cool.
But to do that, we have to be aware of our own emotional baggage and our own issues.
Correct.
To be able to do that and take some ownership of the issues that we have, because it's not just the kids that have issues, parents do too. And once that happens, then the family healing is just a matter of time.
So one of my last questions, I find that it's really hard for, let's say a parent is listening to this right now, it's really hard for them to figure out, so what does that actually look like? And I would love to know if you have any stories of nameless clients who have overcome their modern variety of anger to get in good stead with their kids by accepting their role in what has been difficult between the parent and the kid. But, do you have any examples of that? I would love to offer that to our listener.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I have lots of examples of, as a therapist over many years, I've seen really amazing things happen in families. And there's one kid who parents wanted him to go to wilderness therapy because it was so bad and out of control, and he didn't want to go. And I even brought Matthew into one session because he had actually been a wilderness therapy guide, and he was actually great. He talked about the process of wilderness therapy, and this person didn't actually go, but they did go in the counseling process together. And over time, that kid was using a lot of drugs and had a lot of anger and was really pretty off the rails in terms of how he handled conflict, really became much more thoughtful and is finishing up his college degree. And he and his parents are doing a lot better, even though the parents aren't together anymore. The parents are communicating really well. And that was probably one of the biggest pieces, is have the parents communicate well. Because at that point, the parents were not in communication with each other. And getting the parents to start talking again, and then getting the kid from college engaged in a healthy dialogue with his parents was huge. It actually made all the difference in the world.
So beautiful. Those are the kinds of stories we need to be telling. Yours is the kind of story we need to be telling, where it's very clear that, this was pretty much the hardest thing you ever had to go through, and love and acceptance brought us out.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it's loving and accepting, like Matthew's qualities. Matthew's always been a warrior. He was born a warrior. He's very assertive. He still is that way. But that quality that made him such a great thing about him now was difficult when he was a teenager, because that gift of his assertiveness was turned in such a aggressive oppositional direction. But now it's actually helping him to be an amazing adult. Like there's a story in the book when he was working at a rehab center, and there was this guy who was coming off of meth and was threatening everybody to get his cigarettes back. And Matthew was able to really talk him down without defensiveness, because he has developed that kind of strength of character through what he's gone through. He can be with those situations of people who are in these really difficult places without blinking an eye, really. And that's a quality I admire about him. So it's his giftedness of the same things that caused him to go so deep into the drugs. And that stuff is also what's a very healthy quality in his adult life now today.
Yeah, that's clear. So what's interesting, finally, for my listener, typically when I have a guest on, I've read the book, I've combed through the book, I've underlined and dog-eared the book, and I don't have this book yet. I wanted to speak to this father and son because I knew the story was important. I'm now going to read the book, and I'm going to come back with a part 2 with questions from the book, if I may. Do I have your permission to reach out again to do that?
I would love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, I have some other questions, I'm pretty sure, once I've read through the book entirely. The last thing I would like to offer to our listener is, Matthew, from your perspective, let's say a teen or a parent of a teen is listening to this and they are at their wits' end. What could you offer in terms of a brief note of solace or camaraderie to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's when you're going through that, it's really hard to see that there's anything else, or like their life will ever be different. But I mean, just so many people recover from substance abuse, and so many teenagers make it out on the other side. So I think just reaching out to support groups, to finding a good therapist, and if it's necessary, a good program for your teen. Just knowing that there's so many resources out there, and there's so many people that have made it through that. So I think, yeah, recovery is absolutely possible. Healing from mental health issues and substance abuse. So knowing that it is possible and that things do get better. I volunteer at a teen recovery group every week up in Boulder. And one girl was just like, I had a couple of friends who were also in recovery came with me, and we were just kind of having an open discussion. And the girl who was in recovery, she's about 16, she asked, she's like, I just feel like my whole life is over. Like, I feel like there's something wrong with me, and I don't know how I can make friends without substances, and I want to stay sober, but I don't feel like I can have a social life and stay sober, and I just don't know what to do. And she's like, "Does it get any better?" And we're like, "Yeah, like absolutely, it gets better, you know." And it's like when you're a teen, it seems like that's all anyone is doing, and it's impossible to connect with people otherwise. And really, like, there's this whole world out there, and there's so many people who are sober, and so many things to do to connect with people, and you just kind of have to open your eyes beyond the world and the people in front of you, which can feel like a lot, your entire world, but really there's so much out there.
Thank you for that. It dawns on me that I should probably go and seek out some sort of teen recovery group and try and work with them, volunteer with them. Thank you for that inspiration. Stephen, you have the depth of experience and the wealth of understanding, 25 years plus. I would love to hear from you, particularly what you would say to a parent first about how to manage their kind of hopelessness around the current situation.
Yep. So the first thing I would say is that I know how much you love your kid. Not because I know you personally yet, but because I know how I love my kids. I know how every parent feels about their kids. That's what it is to be a parent. And I know how much your kids love you, even though they may not be able to tell you that right now. And all those times when they were growing up and all those years we have all that bond that the parents and children have, that's still there, and that love is still there, and it has never gone away. And that somehow finding your way back to that place of knowing of that love, that's the foundation of everything else. When you know that and you can experience that and feel that, suddenly a way presents itself. Even if you don't see there is, if you can find that experience of love for your kid and know that they love you, and in that place, something will open up. But you have to keep your mind focused because it's so easy to get distracted by all the trauma, all the substance abuse, all the problems that are going on. And just to know that those things, the trauma and the problems and the poor choices we make, do not ultimately define us. Who you are as a good person, who you are as a child of the divine, and there is something good in the depth of you and in your kid, and that will ultimately come out and see you guys through.
Thank you. Thank you. This is part one of a two-part series, and I look forward to reading. The book is called, for our listener, Light Shines Through the Broken Pieces, A Father and Son's Journey to Healing. I'm going to read it, and I'm going to have these two magical, ordinary humans back in 2023. I want to thank you both so much for your time today, for sharing your story, for helping the myriad, numerous, and probably numberless people whom you are helping through telling your story. Thank you both so much.
Thank you, Elena.
Yeah.
Thank you.
See you again soon.